Hey there, welcome back to Sylvan Path. So I hope you are nice and safe and healthy, and wherever you are that your hands are washed, and welcome to my video. Finally, due to all of the stuff that is happening, I got some time to actually record a few videos here, and some of you can benefit either from the entertainment of it or from maybe even a learning factor. What I wanted always to do with this Mac Pro that I acquired a few months back is to create a VMware lab on top of it. The idea for purchasing this super powerful machine was really that I wanted to get rid of my racks in the basement, well, one rack in the basement with 4 different servers with a nimble storage array and some switching and everything, and move all of that into one single machine, run it all virtually, and still utilize that same machine for everything else I need to do. So in this video, I would like to start a series of setting up a VMware lab on my Mac Pro. In the very first video today, we will begin with deploying VMware ESXi, or the hypervisor, on top of this Mac Pro first, utilizing VMware Fusion. We're not going to install ESXi directly on a Mac Pro. I'm not making this into a server. Again, this is just a lab for me, and I want to be able to run a lab next to all the other things as well. So we're going to be using VMware Fusion and deploying VMware ESXi hypervisor. Then on top of that, we're going to deploy Windows Server 2019, which we will use for our domain controller, as well as DNS server. And then once we have the DNS server, that's when we can actually go ahead and deploy VMware's vCenter server, which is the management interface and the brain of VMware deployment. We will start at the very beginning with downloading the latest software from VMware, and then going from there. Now, when I say latest, I mean the latest VMware version 6.5. I'm not going to use VMware 6.7 here, even though it's a little bit newer, because most of the production systems in the world nowadays are still on 6.5. And also in some of the future videos, I would like to do how-tos on how to go from 6.5 and upgrade to a 6.7. So this will be a great segue into that as well. Hope you enjoyed this and you find it useful, at least entertaining. If nothing else, you can kill the time while sitting at home. But more importantly, some of you may actually find it extremely useful to maybe increase your job skills or something, because this is how I started too, and I'm the cloud architect. So let's go. So if you want to download VMware, you can actually get it free for 60 days. No licensing required, nothing. All you do is go to VMware's website and sign up for a trial of VMware vSphere. You can download same things I'm downloading and follow along and build your own lab. Once you get the access to VMware, you will have a link to something like this where you can download all different versions. But really, all of these have 2 things that are in common. That's the VMware Hypervisor, which is 6.5 Update 3A, which we will be deploying today, and the VMware vCenter server, which is also 6.5 Update 3. This one is F because it was updated recently. Now, all of these other options that you see here, Essential, Essential Plus, Standard, all the way to Enterprise Plus, they all add a couple of extra features, but we're keeping it simple. What we really want to do is deploy an ESXi hypervisor and the vCenter server. And then from there, we can then later on go and expand this lab with all the other things. And I've planned on actually doing Zerto, disaster recovery solution deployment, Veeam enterprise backup services deployment, and all of those things. So the first thing we're going to need is VMware Hypervisor. I'm gonna hit this button to get to there. And then we need a vCenter server. And just because I know that later on, very shortly, I will be also deploying VMware NSX, which is the network virtualization software from VMware. We're gonna grab that as well. So if we go here, we're getting the latest 6.5 Update 3. We're gonna grab this one here. And then we're gonna grab the vCenter server appliance. Now you have ISO and other options. This is the one you want, the ISO. And another one is the NSX. The latest version is 6.4.6, so we're just gonna grab that. And as soon as these guys download, which should be very shortly, we can start deploying things. Now, while this is going on, let's go to VMware Fusion. And this is where we're actually gonna go and set everything up for us. So I'm gonna go and create a new folder here, call it Sylvan Path. And then we're gonna go into network settings. So a couple of things, we're gonna probably want to start writing things down. Let's do this. Let me unlock this so that we can modify network settings. What we want to do is open a text editor, put it here, and we're just gonna keep all of our nodes right here so we're like in tune with what's going on here. First we want to define networks. So the networks we're going to have, I would like to deploy this as closely to a real production environment as possible. We're not going to have different VLANs, but we're going to have different subnets. So we're going to have a subnet for management, for hosts, for vSAN, for vMotion, and you'll learn about what all of those pieces actually are. But we have to start with this first. So let's do this. We're going to call this one Sylvan Path Mgmt. That's our Sylvan Path Management Network. We're gonna give it a subnet of 172.17. Let's do 1.0/24. Now, if you're thinking, how do I choose this IP address? Well, it's very simple. Go online, type in private subnets, and the first hit will be this private networks that are available. So everything on the internet has an IP address. However, these particular 3 subnets are designed for use internally. That's what your Wi-Fi routers get and your switches that are at home or on the internal part of the network. So I just chose this one here, 172.16.0 to 172.31, and we're choosing the 17 because a lot of people use the very first block in a private subnet. 172.16 is the most popular piece of this particular subnet, so we're using 17 just to be a little different and not to cause any conflicts with maybe a Wi-Fi router or something else. This is going to be our management subnet. Management network. We're making every network /24, which means it can have 256 different IPs on it, minus the ones that are already in use, like for the gateway and the broadcast, but disregard, 256, plenty. We're gonna create another network. This is where I put my ESXi hosts, and you may wonder, why would I put hosts on a different network than the management? Most people deploy their host on their management network. I do not like to do this. As long as the only thing on your management network is VMware environment and you have the vCenter server and the host only on it, that's fine. However, I plan to use the management network itself for a lot of different things. I'm going to be deploying Zerto, Virtual Replication Manager, Veeam Backup Appliance, things like that. All of those actually live on the management network, at least their management interfaces do, and I don't want them to live on the same network as the host themselves. So hosts I always separate into a different subnet. So this is hosts management network. This is the network that ESXi hosts utilize to actually communicate between themselves and to vCenter server. Now we will route that to the vCenter server, but that's what they use. And then another network we will need is vMotion. vMotion is a very unique feature of VMware and the reason why I love VMware. And vMotion is actually a capability that allows you to migrate virtual machines from one host to another while they're up and running without even losing a beat. And that's just pure magic. It is absolutely amazing how well it works. And that's what enables very high uptime on VMware environments or like zero downtime type of scenarios. We're gonna have Sylvan Path vSAN. For the storage, a lot of people in the lab, they like to deploy like a FreeNAS or something like that and then share either iSCSI or NFS storage over it. While that is a nice, easy way to create a lab, I like my labs to be as close to production as possible. VMware actually comes with a very powerful storage solution which is utilized in the hyperconverged infrastructure deployments called vSAN, VMware vSAN. And this storage area network, the SAN, that it creates lives on all the hosts and it's fully redundant just like any other storage array, or maybe even more so in some cases depending on how it's deployed. So VMware vSAN is supported here. It's a VMware product. This is what I run in production. So we will actually be deploying VMware vSAN storage in our lab. And it needs its own network, so we're going to create one for it. 172.17.4.0 would be a good one for that. And then one thing I like to do is have a DMZ network. So DMZ network in this case is going to be that 255.0/24, just the last network in our subnet. So this is going to be our DMZ. Now, for virtual machines, I would like VMs to not necessarily live on management or vMotion or vSAN network unless they have to, right? So we're gonna call this one like private 01. So 172.17. Let's change this one a little bit. So instead of 4s, let's do like 101.0/24, like a first network, first private net. And then we're gonna have another one just in case we need another, 172.16.101.102.0/24, second private network. There we go. And one other network that we will have, because this is a lab and this is running on VMware Fusion, we can actually bridge the physical network interface, either it being Wi-Fi or the normal physical network adapter that you have on your Mac or PC, to a virtual network directly. So this network will actually automatically get an IP address as any other device that jumps on my Wi-Fi network, which is very nice to use in a lab environment because you can treat it as your public network. That's like the outside access towards the internet and whatnot. And we're not gonna give it a subnet because it comes from your own network. It's abridged, but we're just gonna give it SP and we're gonna call it external. And that's gonna be whatever router gives. And we'll use that later. We'll find some uses for it. So these will be our networks. And in VMware, whenever you set a network, so right now we're setting 172.17.something.0/24. Default gateway is actually 172.16.x.2, not .1. Just keep that in mind. So let's do that. Let's close this. We downloaded these three. And let's go to VMware Fusion and set this up. You go here to Preferences, jump into Networks, and this is where we add private networks that we want to use. Now, we could be using a router or a firewall or something that we can deploy into the virtual environment, but since this is a lab that I want to run on a Mac and I wanted every subnet accessible straight from my Mac directly as if I was connected to it, this is the perfect way to create subnets here. So this first one, as you see by default, it gets a name like VMnet something. We're gonna call this one SP Mgmt. This is our management. 172.17.1.0, 255.255.255.0 mean/24, and for management, that's all we need. I'm gonna click this allow machine to be netted to the outside IPs. We won't do it now, but we may need it later. Next network, as we just said, we'll just follow the list here. SP hosts, 172.17.2.0. Allow the DMZ for later, that's fine. The next network, we're gonna add SP vMotion. This is gonna be used for VMware vMotion, 172.17.3.0. We do not need to allow NATing because we're gonna use this one purely as a layer 2. However, one thing we're gonna do is we're gonna enable 9000 MTU for this vMotion network itself. Then SP vSAN, it's going to be 172.17.4.0. Now I see that I made a mess here. Let's add that. And these are 17s, of course. That's the vSAN. Then we're gonna add another one. This network is going to be SP private 01, 172.17.101.0. We can enable this, it doesn't matter. Private 02, 172.17.102.0. They don't need to be 9000, that's fine. We have our SP DMZ. DMZ network, we're allowing this 172.17.255.0. And then the last one is, well, we don't need to add SP external because really that's the one that is right here. The SP external is this one, Wi-Fi. It's a bridged network right here, so we can delete that. So we have all the networks that we need. Let's double check. That's 1, that's 2, that's 3, 9000. This one should also be 9000 MTU because VMware vSAN is a storage network, so we should increase its maximum transmit unit size. And this one is good, this one is good, and DMZ is good. So these are the networks that we actually went and created here, just like we specified that we will. With that done, let's close this. So now we're deploying the very first VMware ESXi hypervisor host. So for that one, we're going to go here. We're going to use install from a disk or image option. And from our downloads, we're going to grab the VMvisor installer and drag it here. That's the hypervisor installer for this version that we chose. We're going to say we want to go with UEFI, that's fine. And now we're going to customize actually our settings. So if we go to customize settings, this is first you have to save your machine. I'm actually going and saving it here. We're actually going to call this ESX01, but you can call it Hypervisor 01 or whatever you want. Here we're going to save this, and now we can edit this virtual machine settings. Sharing we don't care about because we're not going to be sharing anything from a desktop to the hypervisor. Mouse doesn't matter. However, processor and memory do. Now this is a Mac with, you know, a ton of RAM, as you can see, and a lot of CPUs. So we're going to actually give this hypervisor 8 CPU cores and 64 gigs of RAM because we can. And we'll enable IO MMU. We may actually end up using this later on, and that's when I'm going to explain how it works and whatnot. But for now, just you can enable it. It's fine. Displays, we don't care about 3D graphics acceleration or anything. When it comes to USB and Bluetooth, the only thing I want to do here is to enable 3.0 support so that whenever we pass something, it can actually go with the highest speed possible. But we're not going to pass through any devices at this point in time. And then we're going to go to network adapters. As you can see, the first network adapter is connected to Mac's own network. It's just going to get an internal IP, and then it can access internet from Mac. However, we don't want that. We want one of these that we made. Since this is deployment of a host, we're going to use our host network for this particular purpose. And I'm going to start writing down a couple of more things here. VMNICs, these are VMware network interfaces. We're going to start counting them so we know what's what in VMware, and you'll see later on where this comes to play. So if we do VMNIC 0, this is going to be our SP hosts. That's our first network. So we just said this first network adapter is on the host network 172.17.2.0. We need to add more of them. So what I would like to do, I'm going to write down here and then we can follow it. VMNIC 1 is going to be SP hosts once again. And the reason why we're going to have 2 network adapters for the hosts network itself is because VMware likes very much when you have redundancies, especially on the network interfaces. In a real deployment and production, you would have at least 2 network interfaces connected to 2 different switches that are, you know, routing for the same network. So in case you lose one switch or one port or one NIC, you would still be up and running. And this will actually, doing it in a virtual environment just like this, will help us later on when we want to switch from the regular standard vSwitches to distributed virtual switches or DV switches. And you'll see when that comes into play, but this is the reason why we're doing it here. Just keep that in mind. VMNIC 1 is SP hosts. VMNIC 2 is going to be SP management. VMNIC 3, SP vMotion. VMNIC 4, SP vSAN. VMNIC 5 can be SP DMZ. I like the networks that are not changing to actually be in order, and then anything else that comes later that you're gonna be adding or removing, it stays there, so it's nicely organized. We're gonna do VMNIC 6 as SP external. That's gonna be our bridge network from the Mac itself. So So we can get directly onto the Wi-Fi with the virtual machine, for example, which is really cool. VMNIC 7 is going to be SP private 01. I don't know if I'm going to use the other one, honestly, so let's just do this for now. So as you know, this first network adapter is the VMNIC 0. So we need to add another device. New network adapter. And we said VMNIC 1, which is the second one, since we're counting from 0, is the hosts again. Then we're going to add a network device. This one is going to be management. Then we're going to add another network device. This one's going to be vMotion. We're going to add another network device. This one is vSAN for our storage. Another one for the DMZ. And another one for external. Now remember, external is the bridged Wi-Fi network. So we're gonna just choose here on the bridge networking the Wi-Fi. You can also choose auto detect, but I know I only have Wi-Fi on this system, so that's what I'm using. And then we're gonna add the last one, private 01. That's the net we want. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Those are the networks. They're in that order. It's very important to know this order because in VMware vCenter, this is how you will know your physical network adapters, by these names. So it's nice to know where each one is actually connected. In real environments, we would actually use VLANs and probably have only 2, 4 or something uplinks, and we would trunk these. But in this environment, because it's simple, we're simply going one network to one network interface, and that's it. Now that we have VMNICs, another thing is to set up actually the storage for this. So as I mentioned earlier, we're going to use VMware vSAN. And the way vSAN works is that it needs one caching drive and then a few more drives that it uses for the data tier. So the first VMware virtual disk is 40 gigs. This is actually going to be for installing the hypervisor onto. This is our boot drive. So we're not going to touch that one, but we're going to go and add a device and we're going to add a new hard drive. And this particular one, we're going to give it 120 gigs to simulate a smaller SSD drive for caching purposes. And we're going to add another hard drive. So we're going to do 200 gigs and then we'll add another 200 gigabyte drive for the data tier. There we go. So now we have 40G for boot, we have 120G for vSAN cache, and we have 2 times 200G for vSAN data tier. Everything else is fine. There are no other options. I mean, we can change a couple. Main thing is that your hardware version is the latest, the most supported. And under advanced, what we can do is pass the power status to the host, so it knows actually we're on a real power and things like that. This is completely unnecessary, but I just like to do it. I like to mimic the real environment as much as possible. If we now just go and close this machine settings are saved. We simply have to start it and the installer should automatically start loading and we can start setting up our host. Now this that pops up like this for the network interfaces, you're gonna see it a couple of times. In reality, you're gonna see it as many times as network interfaces that you actually have. So this allows promiscuous mode so that the VMware hypervisor can actually see and modify network data in flight. This really only happens because this is a VMware virtual machine, and since we trust all the virtual machines running on it, we're allowing the promiscuous mode. It enables other features that we may actually touch upon at some point in time. For now, just know that whenever you actually start your virtual machine, you'll have to enter the password as many times as network interfaces you have, which is all of these guys here. Now, I tried disabling this. The way you do that, the way you do that is actually in the VMware Fusion preferences. If you go to the network settings, there is an option here, require authentication to enter promiscuous mode. I try disabling this and it gets re-enabled every time. So it has to do probably with the new security features on the OS X that simply do not allow entering promiscuous mode on the physical network interface unless you authenticate as an administrator or a root user or whatever. But that's why that is there. So here we are. This is the VMware Hypervisor installer. They haven't changed in years. They all look the same. So it doesn't matter which version you're actually installing. It's going to look like this. You hit enter, you hit F11 to accept the terms and conditions, and then you're presented with the hard drives. So as you remember, we created a 40 gig hard drive, which we want to use for booting the system, 120 to simulate a cache drive for VMware vSAN, and two 200 gig hard drives, which we're going to use for the data tier of the vSAN. So now it's asking us where to install the VMware ESXi. We want it on the 40 gig boot drive. We hit enter. We choose US default keyboard and then type in the root password for this host. We're going to use this many times after, so don't forget it. And when it's ready to install, you just have to follow up with F11 one more time, and there it goes. This process here actually takes a little bit of time depending on the speed of your machine and on a lot of different factors, the speed of your disk and everything. ESXi has actually finally installed. It's now rebooting, and then it will actually start fully and we'll be able to actually connect to it. When your mouse gets locked inside a virtual machine, you can actually click Control and a Command button together, and then we'll pop back out. So if you ever get locked and you don't know how to get out, Control Command. It actually, usually it says it up there. However, we have so many drives and everything on this machine that there is no room for the text to fit. So here we go. Our hypervisor is installed, and as you can see, it already got an IP address 172.17.2, which is the correct network for our host management, .128. Now, if you wonder why did it get an IP or from what? Well, it's very simple. If you go here to your preferences, you will notice that under network settings for the host network, we have actually enabled this checkbox, or more precisely, we left it enabled by default. Provide address on this network via DHCP. It's very nice. It's a lab. I like DHCP enabled just to make things easy. If I deploy a VM, it automatically gets an IP address or something. However, since we want our VMware lab to actually be nicely set up, you don't run production with DHCP on your hosts, so we're not going to run our lab with that either. F2 will allow us to log in, and then we can go and configure our network settings. So if you go to network settings, you will see here you have network adapters. You will see all of those 8 interfaces we added. The very first one is connected. See how they're named? VMNIC 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's why we named them here and chose which one is going to be on what network, because VMware uses these names for the devices. Now, we're going to exit this for a second. In this lab, we're not using VLANs. VLANs allow you to segment your networks in a nice and secure way so that our host's network cannot talk directly to the management network unless you actually have routing in between them. Since this is a lab, I simply chose to have subnets to mimic the idea of having VLANs. However, they can all talk to one another because the real router here is the Mac Pro itself, and it allows all of these networks to talk to one another. However, in the IPv4 settings, we're going to set a static IP address. So we're not going to use the dynamic from the DHCP. We're going to set our own. And our own is actually going to be, so let's pick, let's call this one 101. First host in the network would be 101. And then this is correct. Default gateway, remember when I said here, the default gateway on VMware Fusion is actually .2, not a .1, so make sure that that is correct there. And one thing we can also do here is let's try and ping it. So 172.17.2.101. I just get such satisfaction from actually changing settings and seeing them work right away. That's why I do this. If I hit OK here, you can also set your IPv6 settings. By default, IPv6 capabilities enabled in VMware. You can actually set static IPs for this, or you can disable it. I'm just going to leave it as is. For the DNS configuration, we're actually gonna give it a DNS setting ourselves. So we're gonna tell it to actually use a public DNS, 208.67.222.222. This is open DNS, 208.67.220.220. And the host is going to be called ESX01. We won't put the domain name yet because we don't have it yet, right? So we're gonna hit OK, no custom DNS suffixes. I'm gonna hit exit here, escape button, and it's gonna ask me to confirm with a Y, as in yes, if this is correct. And as soon as I confirm, you can see at the very bottom, we can now actually ping the ESXi host at this particular address. So we can also then access it directly in the browser itself. So let's do that. If we go here to Firefox, 172.17.2.101, this is our host. We're now logging in. Username is root, and the password is whatever you set while you were installing the ESXi host itself. You can join a VMware's improvement program if you want, or opt out, it's up to you. And here we are. This is web user interface of a VMware host. Some people in smaller environments that require only one host, and they don't require extra features like VMware vMotion and being able to move machines from one host to another. There's no requirement for redundancy on the compute itself. They actually just run VMware ESX. You can actually purchase a license just for the VMware ESX and run that without the vCenter. However, the true real magic and usefulness of VMware products comes by having the brain attached to this body, and that's the VMware vCenter server. Let's take a look at here. If you go to manage, it has a bunch of different settings. There is a time and date. We will actually set the NTP servers. It's very important in the VMware environment or any other production environment to actually set all of your systems to sync time via NTP from the same source. Super important. So we'll do that later on once we deploy a server that has NTP. Hardware shows you all the things that we are actually passing through or that are available to this host. Licensing is free currently. Packages don't matter. One thing I want to enable is services. I like to be able to connect to my host via SSH. So you can use terminal to directly dial into host and maybe run some commands or whatever it is that you need to troubleshoot it later on down the line. So this particular service called TSM SSH, we're actually going to hit here on actions and tell it to start and stop with the host. So every time the host starts up, this service will start. However, we also have to start it right now because it doesn't automatically do that. And to check that it actually works, you can try and SSH as root to our host right here. Now, I had another host here, as you can see, that was the same IP address, and the Mac is telling me I can't connect because the fingerprint or the authentication or an identification of that host is changed, and it's thinking somebody is trying to hack me. I could edit this host file here and remove that particular line, or I can just go and remove the whole file because I really don't need it. So now if we try to connect, we will be able to. There's the password for the host, and we're here. We're on the host. Here you can issue other commands and things to troubleshoot, like for example, can we ping something on the internet? Yes, we can. Ping google.com. Does our DNS work to resolve Google properly? Yes, it does. Very cool. One thing I actually didn't show you is that when we were here, whenever you change network settings, you probably will want to go to test management network and test it. And by default, it fills in your default gateway, your 2 DNS servers, and then also it tries to hit you up at your host name. However, this won't actually resolve to anything, so you can just try some other server on the internet. Hit enter, and that's what this is doing as well. It's just testing your network settings, and it's always useful to run this whenever you change network settings. So that's done. We're gonna hit escape and actually get out of here because we don't need to be here anymore. We can actually minimize this since it is not needed. And this is a VMware Virtual Machines window that shows us all the running machines. Now I do want this one in the sylvan path, so I'm kind of organized and I know where my stuff lives. So we have enabled SSH. Everything else is good. If you go to virtual machines, there are none. If we go to networking settings, you will see that this is where our default TCP/IP stack is. So once we actually get DNS servers and things, we will change them here, and local domain. We also have virtual switches. VMware by default comes with a single virtual switch. Since you have to think of VMware as actually infrastructure, one part of that infrastructure is also networking. And in order for virtual machines to have network connectivity between themselves, since they are not physical machines that we plug in with Cat 5 or 6 cables into a physical switch, they have a virtual switch. It acts just like a physical switch. It has ports and you can connect them to whatever uplinks you want and things like that. So we have this one virtual switch here, and we have our port groups. Port groups are actually just networks like subnets. So all of these networks you see here they're actually going to be represented in VMware as port groups. However, right now we don't want to bother too much with them. We will only do a couple of things. The first thing we want to do is that this management network, it's confusing to me because it's not really management in the sense of it's not going to be running VMware vCenter or other things as I mentioned. This is SP hosts. So I'm simply going to rename it so that I know what it is. And this network for virtual machines, by default, VMware creates a VM network where you can deploy virtual machines onto. We're gonna have our own private network as we talked about, so I'm simply going to remove this for now. We currently have SP hosts. Now, the first step we have to do is deploy our Windows domain controller. That's going to be our domain controller for authentication and all kinds of other things in our environment, and most production environments have a Windows server acting as a domain controller, and it's used by virtual machines for all of the other functions that such a system actually provides. The one function that we need before we can actually deploy a VMware vCenter server is the DNS. VMware needs to have working DNS in order to deploy a vCenter properly. So that's the main reason why we're deploying Windows domain controller and the DNS server first. So how do we do that? Well, this particular network is our SP hosts network. We're going to go to virtual switches and create another switch. Now, the benefit of distributed virtual switch, which we will have later on once we install vCenter, is that all the hosts that you have, all the ESXi hypervisors, connect to a distributed virtual switch, and any setting change or any port group like these networks here that you add on a distributed switch are automatically distributed and available on all the hosts at the same time. If you're sticking with the vSwitch option, you have to manually create these networks on every single host because each vSwitch belongs to a host itself. Don't worry if you don't understand this at this point in time. We will go into detail what all of these vSwitches and DV switches do. For now, just know that because we want another network here, we actually want our management network so that we can deploy a Windows server. We actually want to go and create another standard virtual switch, which is uplinked to that network. So if we come here and call this network SP-MGMT for self and path management, we'll leave MTU 1900 because on management we did not change it. We only changed the MTU on the vSAN and vMotion networks. And this is where you choose the uplink. So as you can see, VMNIC2 is connected to SP management. We're gonna hit add. And as you can see, now we have another switch. This one is nicely called SP management. Sadly, there is no way through the GUI to change the switch name once it's created. So this first one has to stay and be vSwitch 0, but that's fine. We're actually going to be getting rid of all of these switches later on. SP management is here. However, we need a network. This is just a switch, right? So we need to go and create this management network. So if we go to port groups, if you recall, I said port groups are your subnets. We're going to create here SP-MGMT, and we're going to actually give it a name with an IP so we know exactly what it is. You can nicely label your networks in VMware with the IP. That way you never have to wonder what subnet they are actually on. VLAN again is 0. We're not using VLANs or anything here, so we're just keeping 0, which means no VLAN. And we want this particular port group to be actually created on top of our SP management vSwitch. So there we go. Now we're done. Let's go to hosts. Let's go to storage. This Datastore here, This is the 40 gigabyte data store that we created originally to actually boot ESXi from. So what I like to do here is rename this so I don't confuse it with other things. ESXi, ESX01 boot. It's not some other data store or something, it's just a boot disk that exists only on this server and it won't be anywhere else. However, we need to be able to install Windows Server 2019 in our case. How do we attach this in? Well, we could browse the data store, and usually in production you would do something like this. You would create like a directory called ISOs. This is where you keep your ISO images. You would say upload, and then you would go and choose your ISO image for Windows with the Windows installer. So we can actually go, I will need this later on for other things. So I'm gonna go and hit here upload, and this is going to go and start uploading this. You can actually close it and it will continue to upload. However, there is another way, because this is VMware Fusion and we're really virtualizing on top of an already existing operating system. You can go to Fusion here, get our virtual machine, our host. You can hit settings, and then under the CD-ROM, see how we actually had the VMware installer? That's how it installed it. It actually has a virtual CD-ROM drive, which we used. You can actually choose that same disk with Windows and connect it to the host itself. So now when we want to go here and create a new virtual machine, the Windows server we've been talking about, we're gonna say new virtual machine. This one is going to be our DC01 or the main controller 01. It is a Windows machine and it is a Windows Server 2016 or later because it's 2019. This simply tells VMware what particular guest operating system is running in a virtualized hardware that it creates. It helps it actually know which VMware tools to mount and how to handle the machine and all of that much better than if you just choose other. For now, we don't have any other storage, and we really need to install the first Windows machine that we need onto the boot drive itself. You never really want to, in production, install anything on a boot drive, because in production, the boot drive is probably a USB drive. However, for our lab here, we can actually go ahead and do that. We'll choose the boot drive, and it's telling us here, hey, the size of your disk, which is 40 gigs, is bigger than the drive. However, because we're going to be thin provisioning this, it doesn't matter. This machine initially won't use more than like maybe 10 gigabytes worth of storage total, so it's completely fine. And then when we have VMware vSAN, our storage, we will move this machine to that. Then it's asking us how many CPUs. We'll choose 2 here. How much memory? Well, this is a domain controller. Really should have something like 8 gigs of RAM, at a minimum, depending on your environment. Mine, I like to have 8 gigs. All of this is fine, it doesn't matter. The only other thing that matters is actually what network we're connecting to, and we want to connect to SP management. So that's the network we just created, if you recall. And as far as the CD-ROM drive, we're telling it use the host device. The host is the man. Fusion, when we went here, we told it that the CD drive is connected and it's the VMware Hypervisor. Sorry, it wasn't that one. It was supposed to be this one. It's a Windows installer. When we go here and tell it host, it's actually going to use that ISO image for Windows as a CD-ROM on this virtual machine. The other option to do it is to go to the Datastore ISO file, go to that ISOs folder we created, and use the ISO from the Datastore itself. As you recall, we just uploaded it. It's now there. We can select that and then install our Windows using that. In real production, this is what you would actually be using. In VMware, because this is Fusion, you can even do this as well. So we'll choose this one instead. We'll go next, and that's it.